Several years ago, my dad was at Methodist Hospital in hospice. I would work during the day and then go to Methodist after work to sit with him into the evenings. And a friend of mine saw the tiring routine I had gotten in and invited me to the zoo one Saturday for a break. My friend Mike was a dolphin trainer at the zoo, and he loved all the aquatic animals. The first place Mike took me was the exhibit of harbor seals and sea lions. The seals knew Mike's voice, and he would call their names and they would get as close as they could to us. They were all very cute. I watched them for a few minutes, and then I was ready to move on. But Mike stopped me and said, "Wait, just stay here for a while and really watch them." So we stayed. We stayed 30 minutes watching harbor seals and sea lions play in the water and on the rocks. And crowds of kids and adults moved past us. But we stayed attentive to those harbor seals. And what I discovered from this was the absolute delight in watching the many varied behaviors of those seals. Each seal, each sea lion had its own personality, its territory, and its relationships. And as we stood there, Mike told me that there was a study done by a sociologist. A researcher sat on a bench in a zoo with a stopwatch, and he recorded the amount of time that individuals and families spent at an exhibit. I can't remember now the exact time, but it was very short, as there was a lot to see, and the attention span of children and adults is kind of short. It was common to treat the zoo exhibits like a video game where scenes change in seconds and actions the priority. But, Mike said, by spending time and paying attention, a whole new world opens up to the patient observer. By entering into the world and time frame of the animal, one could understand and appreciate that animal in a way not achieved by rushing through each exhibit. That day, we never did see every exhibit the zoo had to offer, but the attention I gave to the few exhibits we did see opened up for me worlds of the harbor seal, sea lions, penguins, and the polar bear. And it taught me a lesson on paying attention and staying present in the moment. So what do harbor seals have to do with today's readings? Let's return to our first reading, which happens to be one of my favorites. Moses led his flock beyond the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of a bush. He looked, and the bush was blazing, yet it wasn't consumed. Then Moses said, "I must turn aside and look at this great sight and see why the bush is not burned up." When the Lord saw that he had turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, "Moses, Moses." And he said, "Here I am." Then God said, "Come no closer. Remove the sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground." This story from Exodus was customarily understood as a miracle God performed to get the attention of Moses. In retrospect, a burning bush seems like a cheap trick compared with the other fantastic things God did, like splitting the Red Sea, fashioning pillars of fire to guide the Hebrew people in the wilderness, and making the sun stand still. But look more closely at this process of combustion. How long would you watch wood burn before you could know whether or not actually it was being consumed? Even dry kindling wood is not burned up for several minutes. This means that Moses would have had to watch that burning bush closely for many minutes before he could possibly know that it wasn't being consumed by fire. Now here's the twist on the story. The burning bush was really not the miracle. It was a test. God wanted to see whether Moses could pay attention to something for more than a few minutes. When Moses did pay attention, it was then that God spoke. The miracle for Moses was paying attention to what was going on around him. In that place, at that mountain called Horeb, Moses awoke from his figurative sleep, paid attention to what was going on, and God was there. God spoke to him. What goes for Moses goes for us, because when we do pay attention, we can discover the presence of God in our life. Take any day this past week and look back on it. How much did you do things on autopilot? How many times were you figuratively asleep at the wheel? Sometimes for me, I just tend my sheep on the mountainside and the days pass without notice. Those days turn into seasons. And suddenly I hear myself saying, where did the summer go? Those unnoticed days also may mean that God's presence and voice in my life go unnoticed. And what does God say to us? First, God calls us by name. Isaiah writes, "Do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine." And then God reminds us, the place on which you are standing is holy ground. The miracle is, wherever we go, God is already present. We just need to pay attention. Everywhere we walk is holy ground because God is present there. We cannot make God present. We cannot conjure God up. None of us are magicians of the divine. What we can do and what God calls us to do is wake up and pay attention to the life we are living right now, because that is where we will notice the sacred that surrounds us. We will understand that we are walking on holy ground. The late Catholic priest and writer Henry Nouwen, in his book Reaching Out, recalled a day when he saw an old friend after many years' absence. And as they sat outside on a sunny day, they shared with each other what had happened in their lives. It was a wonderful day, and as their time drew together, Nouwen described what happened next. It seemed that while the silence grew deeper around us, we became more and more aware of a presence embracing both of us. Then he said to me, "It is good to be here." And I said, "Yes, it is good to be together again." And after that, we were silent again for a long period. And as a deep peace filled the empty space between us, he said hesitantly, "When I look at you, it is as if I am in the presence of Christ." I did not feel startled, surprised, or in need of protesting, but I could only say, "It is the Christ in you who recognizes the Christ in me." "Yes," he said, "he is indeed in our midst." And then he spoke the words which entered into my soul, as the most healing words I had heard in many years. From now on, wherever you go, or wherever I go, all the ground between us will be holy ground. When this took place, Nowen and his friend were not up high on a majestic mountain. They were sitting on the grass of a college campus in the middle of a very ordinary day. Yet, because they were attentive to the moment and to each other, they realized God was present with them. They were transformed by this experience, just as Moses was changed by his encounter with God. Just as we can be transformed by simply being awake to God's presence in our life and in all that entails. All of us in this sanctuary have had these God moments when we know in our heart that God is present and active. I think of Nancy at 8 o'clock being present as Margaret passed from this life and walked into the open embrace of God. Any mother or father in here that has rocked their child to sleep and gazed intently into that child's face, watching them breathe, has also encountered the sacred. When I see Stephen Cantner holding baby James on his chest, I see God's embrace of us all. When our children leave for college or for another state for work or for the military, there is holy ground between us and them. In all moments of great sorrow and great joy, God is there. But it is most especially in the ordinary times, like Moses grazing his sheep, that God is present and waiting for us to wake up and pay attention. Perhaps if Peter had been more attentive to the message of Jesus, he would have understood how Jesus, as Messiah, needed to suffer and die in Jerusalem. Jesus certainly pointed out to him the error of his thinking. And Paul's prescription for Christian living that we heard in Romans today can absolutely only be lived out by being present to the sacred in your life. I believe the poet understands the necessity of being present in the moment, of being attuned to the sacred. Mary Oliver, my favorite poet, writes a closing line on one of her poems that seems like a benediction for us today. O Lord, how shining and festive is your gift to us, if we only look and see. If we only look and see. Amen.